Alwash. He was born in Iraq, left at the age of 20 when he was basically unwilling to join the Ba'ath Party as a matter of political conscience. Left to resume his studies in the U.S., where he completed a B.S. in civil engineering at Cal State Fullerton and Ph.D. in geotechnical engineering at USC, and then worked for 20 years as a soil and environmental engineering consultant in California. And then in 2003, following the invasion of Iraq, he returned to Iraq to set up a nonprofit, Nature Iraq. He is the founder and CEO of Nature Iraq. The primary purpose of Nature Iraq is to restore salt marshes in southern Iraq. And for his work there, he was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2013. Dr. Alwash, would you start our discussion with comments?
So I come to you as a tree hugger. Having spent my first 20 years working with the developers raping virgin land in California and turning them into national tract homes. So I've spent the last 15 years atoning for my sins. I am one of those guys that is always struggling with the balance. I mean, we just heard about sustainable development. I come from the marshes. I got my claim to fame from restoring the marshes. And what I always say is that the people of the marshes have lived a sustainable development before the term was invented. The people of the marshes are dependent on the reeds. They're dependent on the natural cycle of the water of the Tigris and Euphrates. And by the way, they are living on top of the biggest reservoir of oil in the world, unexploited reservoir of oil. With that in mind, I mean, the way of life in Iraq, in southern Iraq, is very much similar to the way of life of the Sumerian. Over 5,000, 6,000 years of development, they have learned how to live with the environment. Their houses are made out of reeds. But let's leave that aside. In the cities in Iraq, the old method of construction was developed over, again, thousands of years to acclimate with the local environment. Every old house in Iraq had the outside wall was 2 meters. Actually, it was 2 walls with space in between for thermal isolation, small windows, large tall ceilings. And which is fantastic for the cold winters as well as the hot summers. You have cross ventilation. Everything is designed to live without electricity. When electricity got introduced in the 40s, and of course building 2 walls is expensive. Building 5-meter long or 15 feet tall walls is expensive. So locals began building shorter walls, thinner walls because it's less expensive, and spend the money instead on the operation of air conditioning and heating. And so suddenly you have an increase in demand of energy. I remember very clearly in 1975 living in Baghdad with the first shortages of electricity, brownouts, because the government failed to keep up with the prediction of the demand increase. This continues till today. Today, live in Iraq, an Iraqi household pays over $300 a month in energy fees, from the national grid to the local generator to the generator that every house has. That's a huge burden on a household. I don't know what you guys pay here, but I doubt it's more than $150 per household. Think of the difference in how much you make per year versus like an Iraqi makes, and you have it. Here, over the last 60 years, we have become a model for unsustainable development. But we had cheap oil, and, you know, it's okay. So what am I saying? I'm saying is that oil is a curse for Iraq. It has basically moved the people away from their sustainable model, and it's going to be a while before they go back to the sustainable model. Meanwhile, we have to deal with electrical demand. Everybody wants electricity. Now, one of the ways that Turkey, our neighbors to the north, has dealt with this issue and is by building dams. And I don't know whether you see this or not, but there's a lot of dams holding up the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. The majority of these dams are intended for hydroelectric consumption, the creation of electricity that drives the economy that Turkey needs. Majority of this electricity is transported to Istanbul, some 1,200 kilometers to the north. So I am told by Turkish consultants or Turkish technocrats that they lose about 40% of that electricity. And you're from Duke Energy, so I'm told by energy experts, and I'm just a simple civil engineer. I don't understand all the technical details, but there's 10% of the energy being lost to transportation, and about 30% is lost for people who do not pay fees. And so that got me to think of well, okay, but also the other issue that I wanted to be aware of is that southern Iraq is dependent on the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates, and there is a natural rhythm that the dams have interrupted, and this hydrograph shows you very clearly what the effect of dams on the natural rhythm of the river, and that has resulted. I don't want to waste too much time. I know I have limited time. There is a balance to be done here. The hydroelectric dams are a sustainable way of creating energy. Everybody thinks of them as the silver bullet. Well, guys, it's not quite that clean, unfortunately. Dams do have an effect downstream. And by the way, the reservoirs of these dams are going to be filled within 300 years, 150 years. And then what do you do after that? Anyway, so I come to you from the perspective of saying that the energy has caused people in Iraq to abandon traditions and creating an artificial demand for energy when there need not be. And how do we balance the need for energy with the environment? I don't have a silver bullet answer. I know that for Iraq and for Turkey, they're better off uniting the management of the Tigris and Euphrates River Basin and working together on energy as well as water. Everybody needs electricity. I love my iPhone. I love checking email in the middle of the marshes. It's an incredible world we live in. I always think that I'm 20. I was born 20 years too early. I'm looking forward to the future and how that's going to work. But also, I'm also very concerned about how our grandchildren are going to deal with this conflict between energy and the environment.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll be returning to several of those themes. Our next speaker, panelist is Sylvia, and I'm going to Liho Alwas.
Yes. It is exactly so we are relatives.
You're from Spain? Well,
I'm from Romania.
She's from Romania, and she has 30 years of experience in North America and Europe in the areas of manufacturing and sustainability, with a particular emphasis on the circular economy, the closed circle of material use and redirection, reuse. She is a member of the global organizing team for the open source circular economy and is director of sustainable manufacturing in the Leaders in Energy group. So Sylvia, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It is a great pleasure and also emotional to be back to my school. I graduated from Kelly School in 2001. Although I live in Indianapolis, I don't come often enough to the beautiful Bloomington. But thank you again for inviting us and for organizing this very important topic, symposium on this topic. Like our colleague, the historian, I will start by saying what unsustainable development is, because I think that's much easier to define. It is the trajectory that we're currently on. And whenever I will say we or us, I mean humanity. The Global Footprint Network calculates every year our global footprint, global ecological footprint, and also calculates the date by which we have exhausted every year our planet's capacity to regenerate all the resources that are needed, not only for we, but for all the other living things on the planet. The message of this graph is that business as usual is not possible. So we need to change our trajectory on a sustainable path. So what is sustainable development? I won't repeat it because, again, our colleague, the historian, already mentioned it. I subscribe to this definition. Of course, all of them are valid, but I think we need a global understanding of sustainable development because we're confronted with a global problem that was created by local decisions, and the solutions are global, or at least the goals are global. Again, I won't repeat it, but I would recommend that you go and read it in details and think about it every time you make certain decisions in your individual life, in your business, in your civic actions. We also have a very good plan, so we don't need to waste too much time continuously making plans that are specific to Indiana, specific to Iraq. Again, this is a global problem that we have to solve together, and what best institution to come up with a global plan than the United Nations. Let's say you are a corporation and you are doing your strategic planning. It would be good to look at these goals and see how your strategic objectives merge with these goals. And you can see everything that our colleague mentioned is there. No poverty, clean energy, clean and affordable energy, which is goal number 7, the topic of our conversation, and so on and so forth. Underneath each of these goals, there are the details, there are the milestones by which we measure their accomplishment. The only problem with this plan is that it continuously slides because we're not getting there. So this is now the 2030. Remember that definition was 92, then there were the Club of Rome was talking about limits to growth in the 70s, which is pretty much when we started using more than one planet due to the way we were doing development. So I subscribe to the idea that 2030 is it. We don't have any more time to slide it because we're testing those points of no return in climate change. So I recommend that you go and look in detail at each and every of these goals, and again try to adapt them to your lives as citizens of this planet and in your business, in politics, in every field. This is also, I subscribe to this view of sustainability. We all know that it has 3 dimensions, which is nature or environment, society or social economy. in my mind, economy is a subset of society, and society is a subset of nature, where nature is both nature on this planet and the whole universe. And this is a very, very beautiful and, for me, emotional view of the Earth from space. And I think we should think every day how extraordinary it is that we live on the only planet that we know of that can sustain life and can sustain a very advanced human civilization, which I think this is what we want to maintain. I don't think we want to go, you can live in different ways, and we did, right, for the 200,000 years that Homo sapiens is on this planet, but we want to continue to advance our civilization, but within, in balance with the other fundamental dimensions of existence, which is nature and society. In the end, for those of you who like economics and decision sciences, it's nothing else than an optimization model. You cannot maximize anything on a limited planet, but you can optimize, right? So you can satisfy several conflicting goals or ideals without damaging any of the other dimensions that, again, are essential to life and to an advanced civilization. Speaking of plans on alternative or renewable energy, again, there are enough plans that we don't need to waste time creating others, but just get on with implementing it. So the Solutions Project, which is a non-profit that works on bringing 100% renewable energy all over the world, and has created a detailed plan for 160 countries, virtually all the countries, in collaboration with Stanford University. So this is the plan for the United States by 2050. I mentioned 2030. They started with 2030, but because nobody was paying attention, they had to recalculate again, slide the goal. And again, I don't think we have time to 2050, not that I'm in the catastrophe. I'm an engineer, I'm very cool, non-sentimental. All the signs are that, again, we're testing the points of no return. So let's beat that goal. Let's do this by 2030, or at least aspire to do it. Their major assumptions are that everything will be electric. We don't need natural gas. We don't oil for sure. So heating, which is a terrible loss when you use when you use gas or steam, or really steam. 18th century. I'm always puzzled how, speaking of iPhone, how we charge it on coal. Right? So a 21st century technology still relies on 18th century technology. It's pretty sad. An engineer should be ashamed.
I use TV.
Good for you. No, but it is really a paradox that we don't think seriously about. How we don't have patience in electronics for 3 months for an upgrade, but we have enormous patience, or we neglect a much more important and fundamental technology, which is energy. And we are content to, again, just boil water to turn a turbine with an efficiency of 30%. It's not the net efficiency, but we're losing 3/4 of the electricity generated. So the assumptions are that we will get enormous improvements in efficiency. I know that Marianne will talk about it, and also that we'll rely on electricity. So how does United States look like for 100% renewable energy? A lot of solar. You see a lot of onshore and offshore wind because we have a lot of it. Geothermal, and then other types of renewable energy. And I would like to make a point that large hydro is not a clean energy. It's renewable, which is exactly what we're saying. I always use the EPA definitions. So yes, renewable hydro is renewable, but only small hydro is also clean, because the environmental impact. Yeah, we also had a lot of dams in Romania, so I know the impact is not good. We also have a plan from Indiana, so again, let's get on with it. It relies on solar, again, residential and utility, a lot of onshore wind, which fortunately we have started, we just need to expand, and a few other categories. But you see, this is a good plan for people who are still deciding what to incentivize, what is best. We don't need to waste time. Let's go 50% for wind, and remaining solar, utility, and residential. They have also calculated the social and economic impact. So you always hear the mantra, this will kill jobs, we cannot close the coal mine. Why not? The same, I think, of course you cannot leave coal miners without jobs, or you cannot leave devastated regions. But those coal miners, I think, would be happy to climb on a wind tower than go in the mine and get black lung. I don't think people are in love with their jobs, especially when they're difficult and hazardous, but they want to get the same pay, the same benefits, to see their regions being developed, not abandoned. So which I think is one of the mistakes of some environmentalists when they go, and bulldoze in, and I love them. I am also a tree hugger, but you have to be careful when you talk exclusively about nature and you leave out people. And we've seen, and I think this is why we are behind in implementing this, because there has been a counter-reaction from the people that were affected economically and socially. And I think we can all travel in southern Indiana, in Kentucky, in West Virginia, and see the consequences of abandoning one industry without substituting with an equivalent or better one. So again, these people have calculated, you can all look at the details, also what the cost implications, the operational cost that you are mentioning on you as a household. So I highly recommend that you look at this project and convince your local elected officials, your businesses, to try to get here. I mentioned that we already started wind farms in Indiana, in Benton County. I recommended that every time you drive to Chicago or take the train, which is such an almost impossibility in the United States, and by the way, we need trains, otherwise we'll never get out of oil. Unless Tesla gets its act together and we'll all be driving Teslas. Just look at them as you drive by. They're so wonderful, day and night. I always stop and look at them.
Not if you're a bird.
No,
but that's okay.
Birds are smart. There have been major, first of all, they're very low. They're turbines rather. They're not high towers. Not only they are great, but they provided jobs. They took this county from not knowing exactly how to attract jobs or even tourists. So now they have a whole tourist business there, because people from all over the world come to see the wind farms. It's also sustainable development in the sense that it is integrated with another activity, which is farming. So for the farmers there, it didn't affect their crops, but it brought them extra revenue from an activity that they were not doing before. They were just users of energy. Now they're also generating energy. Because if we're going to do sustainable development, we need to stop thinking in this fragmented way that we're currently doing and thinking on mostly systemical. And speaking of systems, I don't think energy will remain a standalone sector. It will be an integrated, and I'm giving examples, integrated with mobility. One, because I use it, that is the blue Indy car that I was just parking that evening. It is a new service that was brought to Indianapolis as the first US city to be tested by this French company that has been doing it forever in France. So it's a shared electric vehicle, and I highly recommend that Bloomington looks at it. Of course, the sad part is that I'm charging it. I mean, the whole system is being charged on mostly coal. And I know that this is an argument that many people bring against electric vehicles. And my attitude is change the coal, not the electric vehicle. Another example of integrated and 100% renewable energy system is the project on the right, which I have to boast. It's my son's project. In Corsica, it is a charging station that uses only solar energy. So on the roof, there are only solar panels, and they're building now a whole highway that will be completely solar. We can do that here, so just let's get on and do it. Because I think that's a very good example that I insist on giving, because you have to be consistent. So the critique that you're driving an electric car on coal is a valid one. So we need to be consistent in everything that we're doing that uses energy, and that should be renewable and clean. And I would like to leave you with one more thing, because we talk a lot about economy and economics, and we forget that there are much stricter laws than those of economics, and those are of thermodynamics. So we don't consume energy, we don't produce it, we just convert it, the first law. And that's essential, because the vocabulary that we use gets us into trouble, thinking that, yeah, you can produce energy. No, energy is constant. And unfortunately, we also convert the wrong type of energy. So this is why energy efficiency is essential. So while we want to create mechanical energy, we're creating heat. While we want to create light, we're creating heat, which is why we have so many problems with inefficiency in the energy system. Also, energy and matter are two aspects of the same physical reality. So in that sense, I think energy is the most valuable raw material we have. And my message is also that even if we'll be 100% renewable energy, that doesn't mean that we should continue to make a lot of stuff, a lot of matter, because that is also limited. So to change our energy systems for sustainable development, we need to rely on thermodynamics, ecology, biology, system thinking, rather than mainstream economics. And who says that? An economist, of course. So I would like to recommend that you ask your professors or your politicians to look at alternative economic models and economic theories to environmental economics, rather than our current mainstream economics. I think the title of the book is Infinite Growth, is Limits to Growth, which is something that current economics creates an illusion about. And which is why, getting back to the trajectory that we're on, it is unsustainable. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Very good. Thank you, Sylvia. We're going to move now to our third panelist, Marianne Quinn. Marianne has a deep background in science, as do the other panelists. In her case, biology and chemistry, undergrad, and graduate degree in geology. She's been in the electric utility industry for nearly 30 years.
Only 30.
And I note sort of a fair bit of that with Duke Energy and Synergy, and all in the Midwest. So very familiar with the issues here, and then has also had experience in the international arena via Duke Energy's projects there. Marianne.
Thank you, and again, I'm very thrilled to be here. I did get to come to the Kelley School for one of the 2-week kind of intensive little MBA program several years ago. And if you don't know, IU is Duke Energy's. IU has improved their energy efficiency more than any other customer that Duke Energy has in Indiana. So that's a very nice, very good thing for here. I'm going to give you just a real quick view of Duke so you get just a little context. And like you said, my background is sort of natural science and ecology. And so I do care about the birds, because I know that when you poke a system here, you sometimes don't know what happens over here. And I'm very concerned about some of these issues. I should also tell you that I used to be married to a coal miner. I lived in Whitesburg, Kentucky. I've seen the devastation of coal, and I've seen the devastation on economies when coal goes away, and I've seen what that does to people. And one last thing, I'm going to talk about Duke. The opinions, a lot of the opinions are mine. I mean, I don't want you to confuse my opinions necessarily. I'll try to tell you when it's my opinion versus Duke's, just to be transparent. I don't know why. Okay, real quickly, we're a big company. We've been in business over 175 years. We employ over 28,000 people. We rely on a huge mix of fuels. We have it all. We think diversity in the fuel mix is very important. But I will tell you that in 2015, 40% of our electricity generated was from carbon-free sources. That's because 40, that's because we have nukes in the Carolinas and in Florida, and we have hydro. We also are in the top 10, I believe, still. The data changes so quickly these days in both solar and wind development. We serve over 24 million people. Depending on who you ask, we serve between 7 and 8% of the United States population with energy. We are in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. We also have natural gas customers in the greater Cincinnati area, a little over 500,000. We have announced a merger, by the way, with Piedmont Natural Gas, which has natural gas customers heating. This is mostly heating in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. So this is our commercial business. You know, utilities are highly regulated monopolies in the United States. The deregulation has been slowly but surely entering the fold. So the map on the United States map is where we have renewable projects. It is not in our commercial business. This is not up to date. We seems like we add them all the time. We also just announced, and I believe this is with our regulated utility here in Indiana, we are doing a huge solar project at Crane Naval Base. And we also, at the Benton County Wind Farm, we contracted, I don't know if we still do, but when that was being built, we contracted to buy 100 megawatts from that plant. We also have a commercial business in Latin America. You can see the countries in which we operate. We recently announced that we are looking to sell that business, and we can come back to that because I think the reason, just to plant the seed, is it's very volatile. It's a very volatile place to work. The earnings from the business are very volatile. Duke Energy's investors like that steady dividend. We have a lot of retirement funds, pension funds. They don't like volatility. They like steady. They want to know about what they're going to get. So we'll talk about what I think that has to do with sustainable development in the energy space in developing countries. We all know a lot of this. I'm not going to take a huge amount of time. But one of the most interesting things that happened after 2008, after the recession, is prior to that, utilities in the United States, we pretty much knew what was going on. Electric use just kept growing at a steady rate. We could count on 4 to 6% a year. It was, a very steady growth in electricity as the population grew. However, after the recession, and I should also say that we used to look, and I was involved with this in the pre-recession time frame. There's all this data on how cost-effective energy efficiency can be, but people were not adopting it. And there was a lot of discussion, still is, about why not. But with the recession, people did start adopting it. And after, even though the economy is coming back, energy usage is not. And so people are taking seriously a lot of the new things that they can do to make their homes and businesses more efficient. But that changes our business model, right? That changes our business model a lot because we can no longer count on that steady trajectory. We also have other things that are pressing on us. We have customers have very different expectations these days, or they're changing rapidly. In most, I think still in Indiana, but I think we're going to get this through. We're going to start modernizing our grid here. But in most places, we don't know if you're out, if you have an outage, unless you call us, and that's true across the country. We might know we've got a big outage because a transformer's down or a substation down, but when we're restoring power, or if your individual home is without, unless you call us, we probably don't know, which is amazing. And now you have people that they order something from Amazon and they can click on their phone and tell what city it's in as it gets, while they're waiting for it to be delivered. So people have an expectation. Their expectations are changing of what they expect, and we have to deal with that. There are public policy changes. There's a lot of technological advances. Renewables, especially solar, the decline in the cost of solar has been much more rapid than anybody ever anticipated. I mean, every time we do a projection, and let me tell you, we do good projections, and we work with some of the best minds in the country on it, because we have to project for regulatory reasons. We have to file, they're called integrated resource plans, that have to be very robust with our state regulators, because we don't, we don't make profit just to make profit. The regulators tell us how much money we can make, and they're wrong every year. The cost is coming down farther. It's just amazing how quickly that's happening. There's also other emerging technologies. My niece, who is in Boston, she was here visiting, and she showed me on her cell phone. She has this Nest system now that's about energy efficiency. She can control her thermostat in Boston from Dayton, Ohio, which is where we were. She can also see, there's a camera, she can look at her phone, she can see who's around her home, from a security standpoint. But, there's technology just going crazy right now. And so it's a big change on our business. So the way it's always been, folks, is you had generation. Electrons came across the lines, they went to your home. Electricity is not stored. The one exception to that, and this is usually in conjunction with nuclear plants, is when you have, you have hydro plants that are really there just to store water. And
Pumped hydro.
Thank you. When nuclear plants, I might be going too deep. Nuclear plants need to go. You don't want them cycling up and down. They need to go. So what you typically have is when the nuke plants go in full blast, but demand is low, we would use that excess energy to pump hydro up, so that later, when the demand increased, we could let that water out and it would create additional electricity. So, but that was about the only way we had for storage of electricity, literally. And to this day, there's a lot of work that has to be done there. But so it's not stored. But this is what's happening now, data going back and forth. People want distributed generation sources. Microgrids are becoming a thing. The Department of Defense is actually pushing those because they see them as a very secure, a way to secure major facilities in the event of a cyber attack. There was just an article yesterday that a think tank in this country, I can't remember who it was, said that cyber attacks are costing the utility industry billions of dollars. We have people from your little funny, let's see if we can hack in just because it's fun, to people that really want to try to take down the system, attacking all the time. It has become, in the past several years, a huge resource thing we have to deal with, and the government has to deal with. But anyway, it's becoming a much more complicated system. So just I'm not going to go through all of this, but here's some of the things that we're looking at. We have retired almost 5,000 megawatts of coal since 2005. We've got another 18, almost 1,900 megawatts planned for retirement. I mentioned we are investing in gas plants, combined cycle gas plants, and gas transmission. And we have huge investments in renewable generation. I can get you figures, and I meant to have them, and I don't. And again, we're also looking at modernizing our grid through in energy storage. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, because energy storage, if you want your 100% renewables, if we don't solve energy storage, it cannot happen. That's just bottom line. It cannot happen. So I want to, well, this is our renewable energy stuff. We have enough renewable energy now for over 500,000 homes, 2,000 megawatts of wind. These numbers are changing so rapidly that I can tell you they're not right. They're low. We purchased a company called REC. They actually build distributed rooftop solar on commercial facilities. A lot of companies like Apple, Google, they want their renewable energy. They want it on their site. Their employees want to see it. Their customers want to see it. So that's a big driver. In our regulated groups, particularly in the Carolinas and in Florida, we are investing considerably in solar. Frankly, the solar, at a utility scale, at an investment scale, solar in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky is not as lucrative because it's not as sunny as it is. And the policies are better, too. There's a policy issue. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges. This graph, if you look, and I can't see that far. You guys can see it back there. The green, or excuse me, the blue line is load. This is from a California day in California, and this is a model for 2020. But the blue line is load. The yellow line is when the solar resource is available. And the green line is wind resource, what's going on with wind. And what you can notice is there are times when load is really high over in the far right. See how high? The red line is net load, so they've taken what was produced with solar and wind and said this is what else we have to do. But we'll focus on the blue line, it's easier. The blue line, if you look at the far right, is load is very high, but it's not daylight anymore. So the solar radiation is not available. The solar resource is not available. This is a problem of intermittency. This is why storage has to be solved. I will tell you that in 2014, when what they call it, the Arctic blast or whatever that was, that thing that came down, and it hit the Carolinas hard, and those folks aren't used to that was really low temperatures in the Carolinas. And we had our peak load ever, historically ever, at like 6 o'clock in the morning as people were getting up because they were freezing to death, and they you know, Midwesterners, we would have dealt with it. But they really did. It was just a peak load. And there was no sun. There was no real wind. And so you have to figure out how to incorporate these things. So that's kind of that sort of, then there's this intermittency. This is more on, this is a partly cloudy day, and this is more what happens minute to minute with solar insolation. And our grid was not built to handle this. Our grid was built to handle a steady flow. We have to keep it, it's truly remarkable. If you all remember, gosh, it's been 10 years ago now, but the big power outage in the Northeast that was caused by a tree hitting a wire. And, you know, it was 3 days to get the power all back up. That is an amazing feat. I can't tell you how amazing that is to go, that our system and our interconnection with utilities is able to do that quickly. And it's just because of the way the grid works together. But it is not built for this, so we have to learn how to build new control systems, computer technology, to be able to deal with this. And I focused on solar. Wind has some similar concerns. And this is one of the areas where Duke Energy is really a leader. We are focused, this is just 6 examples. We are building and testing and researching various battery storage technologies. Because if you can get enough storage into the system, where, you know, when that sun was really high, but load was low, you can suck all that solar energy into batteries and then have it to put out there when the sun isn't shining. So, you know, this is, to me, this is the holy grail. You want 100% renewables. This has got to happen. These technologies have to get better and better and better. And there's a lot of them out there. This is just another issue. The wind resource map, you can see the purple. That is where, that's the great place in this country for wind. That is excellent wind energy. On the solar map, the darker the red, the more solar radiation there is. That is the great place to build solar. The problem here is that the resource is often not where the population centers is, which means you have to build transmission lines. And I have been involved with building transmission lines many times in my career, from looking at the ecological impacts in particular. But the big problem is people do not want them in their backyard. This is the NIMBY syndrome, and it really is. And you know, I get it. You know, you have a home. Maybe you have a home, and it's a very nice, expensive home, and suddenly there's going to be a power line across your backyard. Is that going to affect your property value? These things happen. We were just trying to build in Asheville, North Carolina. We have a coal-fired plant that they really wanted shut down, and we are shutting it down and building a couple of natural gas plants. What we originally wanted to do was build a transmission line so that we wouldn't have to build quite so much gas. If you know anything about Asheville, North Carolina, it's a very progressive area, and it was easier to get the gas plants than it was to get the transmission line. So these are real issues that we have to deal with. Now I want to talk a little bit from my biology, my Treehugger view of the world. We all know that we built, in particular coal, that has truly been our electric energy source in this country predominantly. And we know the impacts that have come from not thinking through those decisions over time. There's been a lot of issues. Now, I do have to do my little spiel that we used to all burn coal in our houses in the Midwest. No pollution controls, just soot and heat, and we burned kerosene for light, which was very dangerous and caused a lot of fires. So these centralized electric stations brought about safety. They reduced pollution because people weren't having it in their house. And then we went, hey, let's build the stacks really tall. That way the pollution won't be around the community. Yay, yay. And then we found out that the pollution from the Midwest, in this case, was headed towards the Northeast in particular and causing acid rain. And then we figured out we needed to control NOx and SOx to prevent the acid rain. So we built great technologies for that. But We, obviously we didn't figure out carbon until much later, and we still don't. There is a technology, it's carbon capture and storage, ridiculously expensive, not commercially proven. It would take policies to get that moving. But my point is that we don't always think about the entire picture of what we're doing. And I am a huge proponent of renewable energy. However, there are impacts, and there are possible impacts, and I'm not smart enough to know what all of them are. But I just say, don't laugh them off. Don't pretend they don't matter, because they do. Wind energy kills a lot of bats. They also kill a lot of birds of prey. But I'm going to focus on bats for a minute, because for one thing, we don't know exactly why bats seem to be drawn to them. We think there's the sound from the slow revolution of the blades draws the bats, and then it appears that when they get that right behind the blade, there's a huge pressure differential, and the poor little guys get their brains just blown up. Now, bats control insects, in particular mosquitoes. And I don't think we know enough about that, about how much we can disrupt that. I think we need to study it. I think we need to think it through. We are doing some work at Duke. There's this great guy, he's from Indiana. His name's Tim Hayes. And he works now in our commercial renewables business. And he is trying hard to think about ways to at least mitigate or to study bat migration routes and not, and use that in siting decisions, like bird migration routes. And I will tell you that a company like Duke, we have people that can look at those things, we have those resources, and we try to think about that. But a lot of the smaller companies today, there's no regulatory requirement yet, right? And so a lot of smaller companies don't know to think about these things. And the site where the wind might be great for a turbine might be terrible from a migrating bird or migrating bat perspective. So I'm saying let's be sure we think about this. Another one, a guy named Ron Prin, he's at MIT, he did a study, it's a few years old now, and where he modeled in 2100 that 10% of the world's energy was produced by wind, and in his model, he put the wind plants in all the great places where the resource is. And what he found was that surface temperatures in the vicinity of the wind turbines, that's a lot of wind turbines, people, but went up as much as 2 degrees. And away from the wind turbines, it sometimes went down as much as 2 degrees. There's anecdotal evidence of this in Florida. Citrus grove people love to have wind turbines because, when you're removing the kinetic energy that's cooling, and you're converting it to electricity, and so that raises the temperature. And they kind of like it in Florida. It helps them, in that kind of edge time when they want in the winter, when they're afraid the orange trees aren't going to make it. So there is some evidence that this happens, and I'm just saying let's consider it, let's think about it. I worry, I've seen nothing about this except we've heard anecdotal issues with large-scale solar, like out where you do huge acres of solar panels. In Arizona, that is a very light, reflective surface. Deserts are very light and reflective. You're converting it to a dark surface. The sunlight is being absorbed. A majority of that energy is not being converted to electricity. It's being given off as heat. And so what does that mean to that ecology? I'm not saying don't build solar. I'm saying think about these things, try to mitigate them, try to figure it out. And then the one that I spent a lot of time on back when climate change legislation was being worked on, and this particular graph is from a professor at Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin. The Nature Conservancy has done a similar study, which is independent. This shows the land use from various energy sources. And if you look up in the far right corner, that's nuclear, and that includes mining. So that's the land impact from mining and the plant. Coal is up in the far left-hand corner. And you can see, if you get down through their solar thermal, PE, wind, and then the one that I used to focus on quite a bit was biomass. A lot, that was a big, let's grow trees and cut them down and burn them for fuel. Again, I think it could be done, and it could be done well. There's studies that the Electric Research, EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, have done that said if we managed it right, we could actually increase forestation. But, I've got 5 acres of forest on my back lot, and somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to cut it down, and am I going to replant it? Those are the practical issues. But again, let's mitigate these things. Let's think about these things. Let's don't pretend they might not be important, because they might. It's like hydro. Hydro was supposed to be this wonderful thing. We know that large-scale hydro can be a real problem.
It
is a real problem. And both from social and environmental reasons. But you didn't know, or we wouldn't have done it. Yeah, that's the kind of thing. I think we just need to get better as society and as policymakers to think about this stuff in a very holistic way. So those are mine. I want to talk one bit about, if I can, I'm sorry, is it okay? About a little bit of my experience in trying to build sustainable energy in developing areas. Duke Energy used to belong to a group called the Global Sustainable Electricity Partnership. It is a group of a fairly small number of very large utilities from around the world, from developed countries around the world. And what they do, education, they do scholarships for people in sustainable development, if they'll go back to their countries and use what they've learned. And they do the policy types things. They work closely with the UN. But they also do some projects, try to go out and do renewable, sustainable projects in developing areas. Duke Energy was the lead and prime funder of 2 projects in the Neuquén province in Argentina. Now, if you can see where Buenos Aires is, the province of Buenos Aires, and you fly into there, that takes about 10 hours. And then you get on a plane at a different airport, and you fly to Neuquén City, which you can see Neuquén is blue. It's over there close to Chile. And then you get in a car, and for one of them, one of the projects, you drive like 4 hours. It's a nice drive, paved road, it's all good. For another project, you drive less distance, but it takes like 8 hours because it's up in the Andes, close to the Chilean border, and it was gravel, total gravel. And so we did these 2 projects at Choyaca, which is the one up in the Andes, close to. We did a micro hydro on the stream, and you can see the powerhouse. And then in the other community, we did a wind diesel hybrid. Both of these communities had a few solar panels. The government utility had given them a few solar panels, and they had diesel. But Choyaca only had power for like 4 to 6 hours a day, maybe, and Cochico had it 12 to 14. So the problem, they could not store. A huge problem is that when you don't have consistent power, if you've got people that need medication that needs to be refrigerated, you can't store that unless you have power 24/7. So these are very practical things that people deal with. So we did Cochico had this great wind resource. I mean, it was so great that when we were up on top, when we were looking at the siting of these wind turbines, I almost got knocked over a couple of times. It was very, very windy. But you needed the diesel again for the intermittency. So these were our 2 projects. We had, first of all, the Global Sustainability Electricity Partnership. So we had people experts from around the world. We have hydro and thermal operations in Argentina. So we had our financial, our governmental, our permitting, our regulatory, and our engineering people in country, in New Kent, in the province of New Kent. And so we had that going for us. The governor of New Kent was thrilled that we were doing these projects and did everything they could to help us get through the permitting processes and so forth. In fact, to get to Treehugger, you had to go over this bridge that was neither strong enough nor wide enough to bring some of the equipment in, so the government made the bridge so we could get the turbines and things in there. So we had all this support. The communities loved it. They wanted it. There is a utility, government owned. It's called EPAN. They were there. In fact, when we got the projects up and running, and we just did this 2 years later than we hoped, but we handed them over to EPAN to operate and maintain. So we had all that, but we still had problems. Oh, and these were not experimental technologies. They were proven. In Cochico, in the winter, you cannot get there, period. You just can't get there. And so they had they had problems, and we aren't sure if they were not. There's a screen, that stream, rocks come down when the stream is flowing. There's a screen that keeps those rocks out so they don't get into the penstock, into the turbine, and you have to maintain that and keep, make sure those rocks are out. They did not do that, or else they didn't do it right. We don't know. But so it busted things up. But it was in the middle of the winter, so there was absolutely nothing that could be done to fix the problems for several months. So we had these daily operation and maintenance concerns at Treehugger, where the wind diesel turbine is. There's a control system. And it's kind of like, and these people want to go in, they think they know how to set it better than the manufacturer told them to set it. So they would mess that up. And then people, they're far away, so people have to come long distances to fix things. So these are just some, when you're doing these projects and you're talking about sustainable energy development, you have to be very cognizant of what's going, of these very practical, day-to-day things that have to be addressed. And with that, I'll leave you with one thing, and when I was working with GSEP, another project that I worked on a lot was trying to figure out how to get private money into these developing energy systems. And I had this idea that we shopped, and when I say we shopped it, I mean we shopped it to some pretty big name people in the private world about if you could go to an area, and it's a chicken and an egg thing, right? So, let's go in and let's build a microgrid somewhere. Let's get past this idea that everything has to be grid connected. Let's go build a microgrid in an area. But let's bring along a business that maybe makes something or bottles something. And so they are the primary customer of that microgrid, right? But the people in the community get jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this all sounds wonderful. I found no takers. And we're talking about Duke Energy and 12 of the other largest utilities in the world, and we could not get that idea off the ground. We also tried to do what you might call a social investment fund, where investors would see a return on their investment. This wasn't pure charity. But if an investor expects, I don't know what the numbers are. If an investor typically expects 20%, maybe in this fund they'd be happy with 10%. And we could not get that off the ground. And I'm like, why is this? And some of the huge issues are volatility in these markets, government instability. You mentioned like losing 40% because people were tapping in. Duke owned a South African gas utility for a while. That was a huge problem. They weren't making money. They weren't able to maintain. They didn't have the funds to maintain their infrastructure. But part of the problem was people were tapping into the gas, and they did not have the regulatory and governmental structures and tariff structures and all those pieces in place to stop it. Another example I saw and this was in India, and I can't remember which city, but the policy was, they had electric, right, and it was a city. This was a pretty large, a concentrated population. And there's an argument to be made to start with those populations before you try to electrify these remote areas. There's a pretty good argument. But they had a policy in place that, and I don't quote me on these numbers, but it costs $300 to connect into the electric system, to get electric to your house. Well, a lot of these people just did not have $300 up front. And that might not be the right number, but. So what was happening is maybe you've got electric, I can't afford that thing, and you're like, I'll let you hook into mine, and maybe you pay 10 cents a kilowatt hour, but you're going to charge me 15. And so there's this economy outside of the utility, and again, that has all kinds of implications for safety, regulation, financial sustainability. So there's some very practical issues, and that's my thought. So.
Thank you. What I want to do now is to pose some questions. I'm going to pose a couple questions, and then I'm going to open up to the rest of participants. We've had a bit of a contrast here. We've had the domestic and we've had the international. We've had the developed country and the developing country perspective. And some of this goes to international issues. One of the things that struck me, Marianne, when you started was you said, I'm going to present my perspective. I'll try to tell you when I'm deviating from Duke, which gets at the issue that organizations are not monolithic. When I teach sustainability to my business students, one of the first things they say is, why would a business do this? Why should my business get involved in pursuing sustainability? And that leads us into a discussion of what's called the business case for sustainability. One of the elements of the business case for sustainability is that it helps align organizations. It's an intangible, but it can actually go to the culture of the organization. There are benefits of getting people working in the same direction. And then, Azam, when you were talking about Iraq and Turkey, you were talking about two countries. And I'm wondering whether sustainable development, whether at the corporate level or at the international level, has some sort of a secondary benefit, an intangible benefit of bringing a centrality of purpose to those who are pursuing it. And I'm wondering if anything in your experience would go to that issue. Zam?
Listening to Marianne, I was thinking that Iraq will need but 40 years to get to where it's at. I mean, you're worried about provision of electricity all the time of the day. In Iraq, the demand is way there, and the generation is there. So it's like, it's two totally different ways of thinking, and the contrast is incredible to me. It's like, oh my God, Iraq is. And the other thing that hit me is the fact that 40% last year sustainable. Pretty soon, Iraq's going to have to drink its freaking oil. And Iraq needs to wake up. That the oil that they are sitting on is going to be literally worthless. In fact, my mind also went to the fact that the water right now in Iraq, in a bottled liter, is more expensive than a liter of diesel. And I'm thinking, is this real? I'm listening to you, so I'm trying to absorb it. You have a fire hose, and it's like, the contrast is incredible. Now, going back to your question about Iraq and Turkey. I am not focused about the energy. I'm actually focused about water. And when you think about water, water is food. Mm-hmm. Food is survival. It's a lot more basic than energy. Okay? Now, Turkey's focus is generating electricity from the hydroelectric. They want this to go to Istanbul, where their industrial base is. The dams are there to stay. They're not going to disappear. It's going to take them 300 years, and by 300 years, I don't know whether we're around as a species or not. Who knows? And so What I'm trying to do with Turkey and Iraq is actually to solve the water issue, not the energy issue. Now, I'm not focused on energy. I'm actually focused on water because water is much more important for Iraq than this energy, because it's going to be a long, long time before we solve the energy issues. So, for Iraq and Turkey, my view is that Iraq and Turkey and Syria and Iran and Jordan and Israel and Lebanon eventually are going to have to solve the problem together. And my whole spiel is that water, instead of being a point of tension, will have to be the bridge that we'll use to unite the economy. And it's like, you know, and you're going to say, whoa, Israel and the Middle East, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, okay, fine. 5 years after the World War II, Germany and France decided to work together on the Coal and Steel Union. There is nothing that says we cannot do it. We can recreate it. I'm so proud. Sustainability in the Middle East, for me, is not about energy. Sustainability in the Middle East is about water. Water is a lot more important than the energy. Energy can be just used as a helper.
Secondary.
You know, I'm advocating the exchange of electricity for oil or for gas. Instead of Iraq building new electrical generation plants, we can purchase the electricity at high voltage from the hydroelectric plants. It can be run 24/7. You don't have to shut it down. Run it 24/7 and generate the 27,000 megawatt all the time. Send it in high grid, hopefully new technology network, so that you can synchronize and send it down. And then in exchange, buy it with methane or butane or whatever that you can transport from the south all the way to Istanbul. And then when you combine the footprint of both countries, the greenhouse gas effect is going to be smaller, combined. So I'm using energy as a backdrop to creating unity around water.
In a company, as you're very aware, there are always competing views. I think it's interesting for me being in an electric utility because it is a highly regulated entity, and we've had to balance environment, cost, and reliability all the time. Those are, you know, we are required by law to be least cost and reliable. Those are our two things that we have to do. Every state utility commission, that's what they want to see. And the definition of least cost is where it gets interesting. And where, as a utility, we do, and we have to plan over these 30-year cycles. So I think that helps us as an industry think more long-term. I think in some truly high competitive industry, if the customer isn't pressing for sustainability, it makes it harder for, you know, we could talk about it philosophically forever, but the quarterly earnings per share pressure that investor-owned companies are under. You know, a lot of folks, that presses a very short-term view of profitability. But companies, you know, that are seeing that their customers want this, and, you know, I look at like Google and Apple. Google came to us in North Carolina and said, we want to do a data center. We want solar power on our roof. And we didn't have a way for them to do that in North Carolina at that time, legally. You know, there's regulatory issues. And so they said, we want you to do it because we know that you'll maintain it, but we want it on our roof. And we were like, well, it'd be cheaper if we build it over here. No. Yeah, we know. We want it on our roof. And so we worked with the commission in North Carolina to develop this tariff that we can now do that. But, you know, that was a customer thing. And I think that's where you know, you look at it, it's the customers and the population, the millennials, they are all over this stuff. And so that helps drive things. It really, really does. And it's interesting to me, our carbon emissions per ton, and I think you would probably see similar numbers if you talk to an American Electric Power, Southern Company. Those are the other two giant utilities, two other giant utilities. they've decreased 28% since 2005. That's without a regulatory requirement. But
Sorry, is it carbon emissions per ton of coal or?
no, our tons of carbon emission that we emit. Our tons of carbon emission.
Like per kilowatt or?
No, our emission intensity, pounds per kilowatt hour, have decreased 24%. But the actual number of tons of carbon dioxide we've emitted has decreased 28%. And so there are economics at play, which I find to be kind of hopeful and optimistic. There are economics driving these decisions as well.
But from the carbon point of view, we're beyond turning points. We're not going to catch up. let's not.
You know, a lot of people say that, and it's a concern. There was a study out just recently that said the melting of the Arctic and sea level rise is probably going to happen a lot quicker than we'd anticipated in previous modeling.
Yeah.
There's issues.
Tampa, Florida is already suffering.
So is Norfolk.
There is still time, like 15 years.
I don't think the no impact scenario is feasible
Yes.
anymore. That ship sailed.
Yeah.
But it's the question, are we going to have 2.5 degrees, or are we going to have 5 or 6?
Yes, sir.
And the difference in impact is enormous. And that's what we're paying attention
Very
to now.
dynamic. It's not. That's another problem. I want to say two things. Is that to emphasize that everything is connected. So water is not only water. It's food. It's energy. It's beauty. It's hydroelectric. Which means we need to, land use is not mono use, so you can look at a lot of solar farms, there are sheep grazing underneath them. That's one of my preferred view of solar. Again, the wind farm, the wind turbines are on farmland. We should use everything in multiple ways and balanced ways, and we should constantly think systemically. So. You mentioned an organization. Yeah, let me think myself in the context of the outside. I'm not an isolated entity. Countries, again, the borders are so artificial. There are no natural borders. We invented them. So the consequences of one's decisions are felt by others that have no input in that decision. Another word is let's collaborate more than compete more, because again, we're competing for limited resources. That doesn't make sense. And we're going to undermine all of us. On the regulatory aspect, there is also good news, because even SEC is requiring corporations to report on their climate change risks, on their externalities. There are now financial reporting that is being adapted, like integrated reporting, where you're going to report not only on your financials, but on your environmental performance.
See my sustainability report.
Yeah,
I'm finishing it up. It comes out. I forgot to do my ads.
You're doing the GRI report?
We do our own sustainability report. I manage the project, and our new one comes out on April 29th. And we incorporate GRI indicators, and we look at integrated reporting. We don't walk lockstep in any of those particular SASB. We haven't gone to, so we do what we think is.
Actually, this brings up an interesting issue, which is Duke on the S&P 500?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So I was looking at a graph.
I'm sorry, S&P 500?
Standard & Poor 500 index.
The index.
It's
in the stock market.
Yeah.
We're Fortune 250. Yeah. Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing: is this issue of sustainability reporting is very interesting in the U.S. We're a little slow to catch on, and it's much slower than Europe, even I think possibly slower even than Asia. But it's really taken off over the past 5 years or so. It's gone from something in the range of 10 or 20% reporting in the S&P 500 up to about 75%. There are some sectors that are badly underrepresented in that. The sector that is least represented in that is the electric utility sector. They are not doing sustainability reporting. You may be one of very, very few that's actually doing it.
It's growing.
But my question is, what is it about the sector? And I have some thoughts on it, but I'm wondering, from your perspective, what is it about the sector that keeps them from pursuing sustainability reporting?
You know, I don't know that I have a good answer for that, because I hang out with companies that do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, that's the truth. I'm like, why won't they? Because I do know that we're a little behind as a sector. I know that Duke was one of the first, maybe the first, but I don't want to claim that. We actually have measurable, we have goals, and we report goals and status. They're measurable metrics. And that is, we've been leading on that, and there's a lot of concern about that. You know, I mean, people struggle with how to do that. I think that, I mean, in my company, and like I am not, you know, there's this concept of materiality in sustainability, in GRI materiality. We never use that word in our sustainability report. We talk about what matters most. And the reason is pure and simple, and this is a difference in the U.S. and Europe. We are a very litigious society, and we say this is material in the sustainability report. If we use that word, even if we define it within the constructs of GRI, somebody is going to sue and say, if it's material, why haven't you been reporting on it in your your annual, your 10K or whatever? That's a different culture than Europe, and because they're not as litigious about these things. So that's one of the issues that I know is out there.
So I'm wondering, I was talking to Mark Mazel, who's the head of the Indiana Electric Utility Trade Organization, basically. And we were on a panel together, and his comment was, I can't encourage my organizations to do a lot of these things because we have a mandate that's extraordinarily limiting. And it's that we have to deliver electricity reliably and at the lowest possible cost.
Mm-hmm.
And that limits what we're able to do. And the implication is that we can't pursue sustainability the way you're talking about it, not you, but the question from the audience, because we're so highly constrained by our regulatory structure.
It's true. I mean, and it's very interesting. We'll get, we've got a game. I highly recommend it. It's a game. I want to tell you, it's simple, very simplified, but it's on our website, on our sustainability page, and it's called the Energy Challenge. And where you go and you have to meet a carbon reduction goal by 2050 of 80% of our emissions. The data currently in there is from 2010. We need to update it to 2015. But the data in there is from all of our actual emissions, our actual megawatt hours from our actual power plants. And then we use cost. You have to get rid of our carbon emissions. You have to meet our projected load growth, which right now is at 1%. And it's very simplified. We just draw a line to 2050. And then you have, and whoever does at least cost wins. And the cost data for the different technologies is provided by an MIT study and an EPRI study. So they're not our cost data, and except for energy efficiency, that's ours. But it's very interesting that doing that balance. And in some areas, like this is the kind of thing we deal with in northern Kentucky, this lovely little town. If you're into music or motorcycles, you may have heard of Ravicash, Kentucky. And there's a general store that had been there since, I want to say 1838, it may be 1888. But, and it's an iconic place, and they've had music festivals there forever. And the parking area is about as big as this room. So when I say a festival, I mean a very intimate gathering of people. But it burned down. And it was a huge loss. Ravicash has a dog for a mayor, by the way. Have had a dog. I think this is their third or fourth dog that's a mayor. But and our power plant, East Bend, is very close to there. A lot of our people live in that community, work in that community. And so our foundation, which is funded with shareholder money, not regulate, not ratepayer money, gave them a $25,000 grant to help them rebuild. And so you get a lot of people who are like, oh, this is wonderful, thank you, Duke Energy, thank you, Duke Energy. But we also get if Duke Energy can afford to spend $25,000 on that, they can afford to reduce my rate. I mean, that pressure is always there. And so doing a lot of extra things, like even if we thought we should go to 100% renewables today, if it's not cost effective and if it resulted in stranded assets that our ratepayers had paid for, we could not do that. That's the constraint in the utility industry.
I'd like to turn to the other participants. Are there any questions for the panel?
Okay. First off, I really thank all of you for being here and the depth of knowledge that you bring. And I really regret that the room is not standing room only. But a couple questions here. What I don't hear often is the increasing population, which is tracking the energy usage. Obviously, a really significant perspective on that. In Uganda, families routinely have contests to see how many babies they can have. And the population in, I'm going to say 1970, maybe 1960 was 10 million. Today it's 30 million. And so putting that kind of pressure on the global system is critical. We can change CFLs, but this kind of, by the year 2050, the population is going to increase by approximately 50%. And the second, I guess that was just a point, but another perspective is we've been really, again, intrigued with energy storage, looked at different types, and finding very interesting possibilities with these aluminum-ion battery from Stanford University, and the idea of having that in cars and also in homes seems to make a lot of sense. That we should be saving lithium for precious things like this, but having a large fleet of plug-in cars then allows you to have an energy buffer system that requires very low maintenance, and hopefully but also having the same system in homes has very interesting possibilities.
On the population issue in Iraq, I have a similar story to what you just cited from Africa. We were 6 million people in 1958, we're over 30 million people now. And it's our social network, right? During the sanctions between 1991 and 2003, the Iraqi dinar went down from, I think it was $3 a dinar to 2,000 dinars a dollar. I mean, 3,000. I mean, basically, it was just like the Roman Republic in Germany after World War I, or the lira after World War II, Britain. And so, as long as the children are the social security for the parents, that problem will stay. It is only when the economic well-being of the state takes over, or there is a guarantee for the future, then you see reduced numbers of people. And I don't have magical solutions. Obviously, the decision is in the hand of the politicians. So that's one thing. On the storage, I don't know whether you recall reading something about the what is it? The U.S. military organization, DARPA, coming up with network scale storage technology with chemical batteries. So, while we laugh at engineers like me for not thinking through the consequences, technology will improve somehow. I mean, you give the engineers a specific challenge, they'll come up with, and enough funding, they will come up with solutions. And I think
we think it's a race for the economics right now. There's several different technologies, and getting them to scale and getting the price point right, somebody's going to do it. I mean, it's still going on. There's several. This guy from MIT, he started a company called Ambry, which is liquid metal batteries. They're very interesting. And 5 years ago, I'm like, this is it. And they're still dealing with some of the technology issues. But Bill Gates invested in them, a lot of venture capital.
Tesla battery.
Tesla. Things will happen. I mean, IKEA, and I don't think they do it here yet, but in certain places in Europe, you can go to IKEA and buy solar panels, with the Allen wrench and come and put them on. So I mean, these things, it's getting there. The economics are getting.
On the population question, the answer is gender equality. When women are emancipated, there is really population control. And one of the goals in those 17 is gender equality. There is a direct correlation between education, women equality, and population growth. And you can look at the developed world, you can look at Scandinavia, which is the best on gender equality, what population.
But they're going extinct.
No, because that's a very easy thing to do. It's much easier to let me have 2 children instead of 1 than from 10 to 5.
To 2.
And the other factor that, if you look at our country and probably Europe as well, but I mean, up until probably the 40s or so, more kids meant more workers, meant the farm did better.
Yes,
when we were a rural country, more rural than urban, having kids was how you kept the farm going. And as we moved away somewhat from that society, that's when women started going into the workplace, and all these things work together to reduce population stress. So, there's a potential for a rosy outcome if things can move and progress in a certain way in these developing countries.
And on the cars becoming an energy source, that's exactly what the future, which is why I presented that system. That charging station is 24/7 because it's both ways. At night, it's the cars that are using the batteries to recharge the parasol, and vice versa during the day and when it's on. So again, we're not going to have distinct sectors anymore, but multiple uses and multiple applications of different sectors. So there won't be energy, it will be energy mobility, it will be energy and water. And you are right, there are excellent developments. We cannot rely on lithium because it's scarce. If you look, there is a table of elements that shows you which elements are at risk, and I think lithium is in yellow. Not to mention it is confined to a few countries that can control it and prevent, like China. So we need to rely on abundant resources. They're limited, but they're abundant. So if we can get sand into batteries, and I'm sure we can, that would be ideal.
We're going to take one more question.
It's not a question, it's an amusing fact, because we're talking about population. Some may know this, but in Turkey, recently abortion was outlawed, and the government is urging, led by the president, every woman to have 3, not less than 3 children. So, you may want to use this in your classes, whatever.
Do you know why? Do you know what the rationale
More
is?
voters.
I do, but it would take a long political discussion.
Would be worth looking into for us. Good. I actually, in my sustainability classes, I start off with kind of what's the business landscape and what's the physical landscape, and I bring in population. And the business students are looking at going, why do I care? Why do I care about the population? And when you start spinning this out, what does it mean for a business, and particularly for a multinational business, if population is changing? It's really very important for them to watch this.
And for those of us who teach human rights, women's rights, I mean, this is a huge setback.
It is. Well, join me, if you would, in thanking our panelists for their very interesting comments. you.